Brunei celebrates the wedding of Prince Abdul Mateen in a lavish 10-day-long royal ceremony.
Prince Mateen and his wife Anisha decided to spend their evening in a humble church. Their extraordinary encounter will leave you in shock and full of praise for the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. In the quiet embrace of a modest church, something extraordinary happened that left everyone in stunned silence, including two unlikely witnesses, Prince Mateen and Anisha. Known for their modernity and royal grace, they entered the church seeking nothing more than a moment of reflection. But what they encountered would unravel the very foundation of their beliefs. A mysterious glow illuminated the altar, casting an otherworldly light on the faces of those present. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon, it was a feeling, a presence that everyone felt, but couldn't quite explain. Then, as if from nowhere, a voice resonated, not through the air but through their hearts. "Be still and know that I am here." Imagine stepping into a place expecting peace and walking out with a truth so profound it changes everything you thought you knew. For Mateen and Anisha, that evening wasn't just about witnessing a miracle, it was about finding a faith they never knew they were searching for. What did they see, and how did it change them? Stay with us to find out all about it. During one of their many visits to a foreign country, Prince Abdul Mateen and his wife, Anisha Rosna, decided to explore the local streets of the foreign country they were visiting. Known for their modernity, wealth, and royal grace, the couple, who had been married since January, loved to go on many trips together as a way to spend more time with each other away from the prying eyes of the public. Prince Abdul Mateen, known globally for his charisma, dedication to public service, and a passion for adventure, had embarked on a private retreat far from the grandeur of Brunei's royal palaces. Apparently, Prince Abdul and Anisha were worn out from the luxurious trips and needed something simple, a quiet moment of reflection. This decision would unravel the foundations of their beliefs and change their lives forever. The church was a small establishment tucked away in a serene village. It was humble, with wooden pews polished smooth by decades of prayers. Its floors were rough with footsteps, and the stained glass windows, showing vivid, vibrant scenes of saints and miracles, casted a soft, colorful reflection on the stone walls. The air in the church was heavy with the spicy aroma of burning incense and the faintest hint of aged candles. With its aged look, the church was like a sanctuary untouched by time. The simplicity of its looks was both grounding and comforting. The couple went on to sit in the middle row, feeling as though they had made the right decision as they made themselves comfortable on the unassuming wooden chairs. They blended in among the congregation as they observed the community around them. Prince Abdul Mateen noticed that most of the congregations were families huddled together with prayers on their lips, while some elderly couples held rosaries and children fidgeted quietly. As they observed the strange, quiet church, the priest began the service, his warm and steady voice filling the room with an air of peace and calm. Mateen, usually restless in such settings, felt an unusual stillness wash over him. Anisha, too, felt a strange peace fall over her, her gaze fixed on the altar where a large crucifix stood, brightened by the soft glow of candlelight. Unable to keep it to himself anymore, Prince Mateen leaned over to Anisha and whispered, "There is something about this place. I do not know what, but it feels different to me." Anisha nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning the altar where the priest stood with reverence. Although Prince Mateen were no strangers to grandeur, and their lives were filled with elegance from lavish palaces to costly galas, yet beneath the surface the couple craved for something more serene and modest. They longed for something real. But with their royal status, it was hard, often impossible, for the couple to get exactly what they craved for in their lives. Prince Abdul Mateen, who is the fourth son and 10th child of Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. The Sultan of Brunei is a major in the Royal Brunei Armed Forces, a trained helicopter pilot and a polo player. He had a very busy life full of royal activities and mandatory parties, which he had to attend due to his standing in the royal family. Anisha, on the other hand, is the granddaughter of one of the Sultan's special advisors. She is also an entrepreneur who runs a company that produces silk garments and a holiday planning establishment. Having known each other since 2018, Prince Abdul Mateen and Anisha had finally gotten married earlier in the year, taking their beautiful relationship to a new level. The couple had many things in common, including their love for service and hard work. Similarly, they both craved a new type of peace that the hustle of royalty could not provide to them. Prince Abdul held on to Anisha's hands as they both savored the newfound peace. Anisha continued to stare at the altar in barely concealed awe, but as the service progressed, something began to change. A soft golden light started to shine forth from the altar. It was faint at first, almost like a trick of the eye, but it grew steadily brighter, eventually catching the attention of the congregation in the church. The priest had no choice but to pause mid-prayer, his gaze fixed on the source of the light as a flurry of whispers spread through the pews. Anisha and Prince Abdul were just as shocked and amazed as the rest of the crowd. Anisha, particularly, felt a warmth wash over her, starting from her chest and spreading through her limbs. She was certain it wasn't the warmth of the candles or the body heat from the excited crowd. No, it was something else entirely. It was something greater, something she couldn't quite explain to herself. Feeling overwhelmed, Anisha reached out for Mateen's hand, her grip firm, but Abdul noticed she was softly trembling. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared into his eyes. The look in his eyes mirrored her own, a look full of light and awe. Mateen nodded thoughtfully, his eyes locked on the glowing altar as though it were a treasure. "I do feel it. It's unlike anything I've ever felt before," he replied, his voice thick with a mixture of awe and confusion. As if on instructions, the whispering congregation fell silent, the air thick with anticipation, as though everyone seemed to sense that they were about to witness something far beyond the ordinary. As the golden light continued to glow on the altar, something amazing began to happen. The small church, which was already filled with an overwhelming sense of peace, seemed to shift as though time itself had slowed down. The priest, his kind face now pale with wonder, stepped back from the altar, his hands trembling as if he was also being drawn into something far greater than he could understand. Anisha's heart raced wildly, but there was no fear, only a deep sense of curiosity, like something inside her was calling her forward. Once again she squeezed Mateen's hand tighter, the warmth of the light still enveloping her. Anisha could not find any words to explain how she was feeling. It was like the world outside had disappeared, and all that ever existed was the overwhelming presence in the church. A murmur of disbelief spread among the crowd, but no one could bring themselves to speak out loud. They all just stared wide-eyed at the altar, where the source of the light seemed to be coming from, though no one could see its origins. The priest slowly approached the altar once more, his once confident voice faltering as he spoke. "What could this be?" he muttered, his words barely audible over the soft hum of the congregation's breathing. His shocked eyes were locked on the space in front of him as though he was waiting for some answer, or perhaps a sign that would explain the unexplainable occurrence. It was at this point things got more bizarre. A voice came forth from the soft light. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper, but it carried through the church with a clarity that no one could deny. "Be still and know that I am here." The words rang in the hearts of everyone in the congregation, the sound vibrating deep within their souls and their heart. It was not a really loud voice, but the message it said was almost impossible to ignore. Anisha, who was now visibly shaking, closed her eyes as she felt overwhelmed by the sensation of warmth that seemed to fill the very air around her. She was certain she had never felt anything like this before, not even remotely close. It wasn't just the light, it was the voice, the peace, the connection. And when she opened her eyes, she saw that was staring ahead at the altar. His eyes widened in astonishment as he let out shallow breaths. "Did you hear that?" she asked him in a whisper, her voice trembling as she waited for his response. Abdul nodded gingerly, as though he was unable to speak at first. There was too much to process, too much happening all at once. The sensation in the air, the words coming from the warm light, it was all too much to explain, but there was no denying that it was real. Before Prince Abdul and Anisha, his wife, could gather their thoughts, the glow grew brighter and a sense of serenity took over the two of them. They were no longer just two royal figures who were seeking an escape in a room filled with strangers. They were part of something much larger, something visibly divine. The very air around them seemed to come alive with purpose, as though the entire church was holding its breath, waiting for the next wave of this mysterious event to unfold. No one in the room spoke. No one could move. They were all paralyzed by shock and wonder. To Anisha, it felt as though the entire world had come to a standstill, and all eyes were fixed on the altar, waiting for what would happen next. No one knew what it would be yet, but the anticipation was almost thick enough to touch. The quiet buzz of excitement slowly gave way to deep, respectful silence, as everyone waited for what was about to happen. What exactly was this bright light? Stay with us as we find out. In the meantime, the golden light continued to grow, wrapping the church in an ethereal glow. Time seemed to slow down. The air was thick with a tangible divine energy, filling the space with a weight and presence that none of the people in the crowd, including the priest, had ever felt before. Anisha's breath caught in her throat as the voice spoke once more, its words resonating deep within her chest as if they were meant for her alone. "I am here with you. You are not alone." Each word felt like a personal embrace, enveloping her like a comforting hug and empowering her at the same time. The power in the voice was so strong, it was no longer just a formless voice. It was a presence, a force that connected them all. The priest who had been trembling before was completely still now, his hands clasped tightly together as his body bowed in reverence. He had fully surrendered to the moment, and in doing so, he had found peace. His eyes were closed, but there was no fear in him, only an undeniable faith, the kind that went against any doubt or disbelief. Anisha, her hands still in Mateen, felt an overwhelming sense of awe flood through her. It was as though the entire world had faded away, and all that was left was this sacred moment. Everything she had known, her royal duties, her life in the spotlight, and her carefully crafted world all felt irrelevant. In the moment, all that mattered now was this golden light, this voice, and the undeniable presence of something greater than anything she could comprehend. Mateen, too, was transformed. He had always been the more skeptical of the two, the one who felt the need to question everything, but now witnessing this great miracle himself took away all his uncertainties. His eyes, which were once filled with doubt, were now wide with wonder. His heart opened to the possibility of a truth he had not considered before. Anisha could see the shift in him as a quiet resolve settled into his features. "We have to do something today," he muttered to her again, his voice thick with emotion. "We cannot just watch this happen. We need to accept it into our hearts." Anisha's heart raced as the weight of his words settled in. It wasn't enough to simply witness this moment. She recognized it was a call, a demand to act on the divine words. Everyone could feel the urgency in the air, the pull of something divine urging them both to make a choice of acceptance. The golden light which had been growing steadily now seemed to have consumed everything. It was shining brighter than ever. "Let us do it, Mateen," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper but strong and full of conviction. "We have to accept whatever this is. Whoever this is, we accept." That seemed to seal their fate. Without another word, they both took a step forward. It was not a grand gesture, but it was a decision that would change everything for them. In that moment, they chose to embrace the unknown, to let in the miracle unfolding around them. Prince Abdul Mateen and Anisha had no idea what the future would hold, but they knew one thing for certain. They couldn't turn back now. They were ready for whatever came next. The moment the couple stepped forward to the altar, a great silence fell over the church. It was as if the universe itself paused, holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold. The golden light continued to glow with a warmth that was like being bathed in a warm spring. It was as though it were alive and drawing them closer to something much larger than themselves. Anisha and Mateen stood at the altar now, their feet planted firmly on the ground, as strong as their resolve. Their hearts beat in synchrony. Every fiber of their being seemed to glow with the energy that enveloped the room. The air felt thick with beautiful possibilities. The voice, which had once whispered from the depths of their souls, now spoke again louder and clearer than ever before. "You are chosen, and your path is now clear." Mateen's eyes widened, the weight of the words settling deep inside his heart. He had always thought of himself as a man of reason and a person of control, but in this moment those things seemed so insignificant compared to the presence before him. A deeper truth seemed to be unfolding, a truth that surpassed all logic and understanding. He looked at Anisha, who was standing beside him, and in that instant he knew with every cell of his being that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. Anisha too was overcome with emotion, her throat tight with the greatness of what was happening. She had always believed in something greater, but to feel it surrounding her, it was beyond her wildest dreams. Anisha knew it wasn't just the unexplainable glow of light or the voice it carried. It was the sense of love and belonging that permeated every corner of the church. It felt like the loving embrace of a long-lost family, like finally finding home after years of wandering about. They both dropped to their knees at the same time, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the moment they were experiencing. There was no longer any doubt in their hearts. They understood what was happening now. This was not just a fleeting encounter. It was the beginning of a new life, one in which they would no longer be defined by their titles or their past. The couple could tell they were being called to something supreme. Soon the voice spoke again, its tone filled with an intense love and command. "Accept me, and I shall guide you." The glow in the room intensified, filling everyone with a peace so deep it felt as though every worry and hidden fears was being washed away from their soul. Mateen, his eyes brimming with unshed tears, turned to Anisha, a look of happiness on his face as he whispered to her, "I've never felt anything like this before." His voice was hoarse with his emotions. "I'm ready, I believe," he said with resolve. Anisha nodded happily, her heart racing. "I believe too," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a strong conviction. "I am ready." The words they spoke were not just words, but instead a declaration of commitment to their new beliefs. The moment they spoke those words, a sudden wave of light washed over them, pouring down from above and enveloping them in its brightness. It wasn't blinding, but it was overwhelming in its beauty and intensity. It felt as though the very fabric of the universe had opened up to them, revealing a path that they had never seen before. The voice, now filled with both tenderness and authority, came once again. "You have made the choice, You are now one with me. Go forth with love and faith." In that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The church, the people, the world. They all seemed distant, like they were no longer part of reality. All that mattered was the light, the love-filled voice, and the bond they now shared with something far greater than everything else. Anisha and Mateen slowly rose to their feet, both of them still trembling with the intensity of what had just happened to them. They felt different in a good way. They could tell something had changed. It was as though the very essence of their beings had been altered and purified. The weight of their decisions settled into their hearts, but it was not heavy like a burden. It was a gift filled with promises of something greater to come. The priest who had been silently witnessing everything now stepped forward, his voice filled with joy and acceptance. "You have received the gift of our Lord," he said, his words almost reverent. "Go forth in faith and let this moment guide you," he said with great confidence. As the light began to dim, the church returned to its usual shadowy ambiance. Anisha and Mateen stood together on the altar, their hearts beating together in a bond that was stronger than all earthly possessions. They had personally witnessed a miracle, and they had made a choice. Now the future lay before them, filled with many possibilities. As the church returned to its familiar, peace-filled quiet, the soft echo of footsteps filled the room, but it still felt different. Now the silence was no longer heavy with uncertainty or fear. It was filled with a strong air of hope. Anisha and Mateen stood side by side, their hands subtly reaching for each other. Anisha looked at Mateen, her eyes brimming with tears. "I feel different," she whispered to her husband. "It's like everything I've always known has shifted, and the weight I've been carrying all these years is finally gone." She laughed lightly, wiping her tears. Mateen nodded in agreement, his heart still racing from the intensity of what had just occurred. He understood exactly how she felt. "I know exactly what you mean. It feels like we've been given a second chance," he said to her. The happy look on his face reflected her own. The warmth of the light that had filled the church had faded, but its effects stayed deep in their hearts and in the mind of the small church congregation. It was as if a new sense of clarity had been gifted to everyone. The things that had seemed so important only a moment ago, Abdul's titles and the high status Anisha commanded, even the expectations of others felt insignificant now in comparison to the love and purpose they had just received. They no longer cared about impressing anyone with their luxurious possessions or about proving themselves to the world. They were content and fulfilled. Above all, they felt loved in a way that was so deep and so pure it left them breathless. The priest who had witnessed their transformation now approached them with a gentle, accepting smile on his kind face. His voice was soft but filled with wisdom and a touch of the divinity they had witnessed earlier. "Today, you have made a life-changing choice. This is just the beginning of a new journey for you two, a journey of faith, love, and purpose. You have been given the gift, and now you must carry it forward," he did in a solemn voice. Anisha and Prince Abdul Mateen exchanged a knowing glance, their hearts filled with gratitude and certainty. They knew that they would never be the same again. Their lives had been altered forever, and they now stood united in a bond that was both spiritual and unbreakable. They had accepted the love of Jesus, and in doing so had unlocked a new path for their lives. The church still seemed to hum with a sacred energy, as though the walls themselves were echoing the miracle that had just unfolded. The sun, which had been hidden behind dark clouds earlier, now peeked through the stained glass windows, casting colorful beams of light across the altar. It was a beautiful sight, as if the universe itself was smiling upon them. Mateen was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know this. I am ready to walk this path with you. With Jesus by our side, we can surely face whatever comes next together." Anisha smiled as her heart swelled with love and a newfound strength. "Together," she repeated softly, "we have each other, and we have our strong faith. That's all we need." She smiled as she squeezed her husband's hands. The couple stepped out of the church hand in hand. For them, the world seemed to shine a little brighter. The bustling streets outside no longer felt overwhelming. Instead, the murmur of the traffic seemed to be full of promise and opportunity. They were no longer the same people who had entered the church just hours ago. They had been transformed, and the world was now theirs to face with courage, love, and unwavering faith. In the distance, the sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, signaling the end of the day. But for Anisha and Mateen, this was just the beginning of a life full of purpose, granted by their newfound faith and guided by the love that had been bestowed upon them in that sacred moment. Anisha and Mateen walked side by side, their hearts full of faith and hope for the future. The journey they had just begun was still in its infancy, but it felt like they had already come so far. They had made a choice that would not only change their lives, but also touch others in ways they couldn't yet understand. Who could have known that a simple evening walk meant to take them away from their stifling responsibilities would result in an encounter with the Most High God? It was obvious that the Lord found the couple at their most oblivious moment, and in His infinite love, brought them into His embrace. What do you think about Prince Abdul Mateen and Anisha's spiritual encounter? How do you think it would change their lives? What do you think? Don't hesitate to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more miraculous stories. Also, click on the following videos shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.